Welcome to part 2 of this video tutorial. In this tutorial, we will be using the Auto-Tune Vocal Compressor in a hands-on demonstration. If you missed the first part of the tutorial, don't worry. You can click the link above to watch it now. After you've watched the first part, come back to this video for the hands-on portion. For those who want to refine their vocal performance in the studio or your home studio, this tool is an excellent choice. Auto-Tune Vocal Compressor is a tool that helps to refine and perfect vocal performances in your recordings by providing management of your vocal dynamics. This tool enables you to create high-quality recordings effortlessly, resulting in professional sounding tracks. In this video, we'll cover all of this and more coming up right now on this episode of Pro Music Creator. This video is the second of 2 in a series of videos covering all the features of the Auto-Tune Vocal Compressor. In the previous video, we covered all of the fundamentals and the basics, and in this video, we'll actually experiment and comprehensively learn how to use the features of this compressor. Before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome, and thanks for joining us. I'm Ken Ramirez, and this is Pro Music Creator, where we all become pros at producing and making music together. Hopefully, by the end of this video series, we'll all be pros at the art of using Antares Auto-Tune Vocal Compressor to create, produce, and perform music. If you enjoy videos like this one, you may want to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notifications so you'll be alerted each time I post a new video on this channel. In the previous video, we only talked about the Auto-Tune Vocal Compressor's features and how they work. But in this one, we'll actually put it to the test by feeding it some vocals, because what way to show off a vocal compressor than by making it listen to our terrible singing. I even sang a song myself, which I'll eventually force someone else to sing and produce. So, please don't blame the compressor for my horrendous voice, as I am not a trained singer or even a good one at that matter. So let's get started. All right, so here in Ableton, I've set up a new track that I recorded. In fact, I created a video just the other day on the inspiration that led to this song that I created here. I actually recorded the vocals as well, even though I'm not the best of singers, but I gave it a shot anyway, just so that we can have something to compare. Let's grab the vocal compressor. I'm going to open that up here. Okay, so we have the global controls as we saw in the other video. If we click on the logo, then that will open up the Antares Central, and from the Antares Central we can go ahead and install the licenses that we've purchased for the product. That's what that gives us. And from here we also have the undo button, so any changes I make here, let's say I change this input and output, I set this up. Now I can go ahead and set all those settings right back as you just saw with the undo button. But if I wanted to get back to one of those changes, I can just simply click on the redo button and it'll set them back up for me. Okay. Next, we have the settings. Settings is accessed through this menu. And here I can go to appearance. I see dark, light, system. Currently I have it set to light. If I set it to system, it's just gonna look to see what I have as my default on my Mac. So my Mac is set to, right now it's set to dark mode, so it automatically set this to dark mode. But I can overwrite that by saying, let's go to light mode. Or if my Mac was set to be light mode all the time, I can override it by saying, let's go to dark mode. All right, so I'm just gonna keep it at light mode for now. What else we have in here? We've got the pitch reference, and as I explained in the other video, this just simply means what channel is it going to use for actually listening for pitch control when we get into some of the settings in the modern compressor type. The enable OpenGL. OpenGL is a specification for how graphics are put out on a given computer. You don't need to have OpenGL on, but if you do have support for it on your machine, this button here will allow you to take advantage of OpenGL. On Windows, it's set by default, as I mentioned before, and on the Mac, it's set off by default. Next one is the save all settings as default, which means any settings that I set up in here, anytime I open up a new instance of the vocal compressor, it'll automatically use those settings. So they'll be automatically set for me. I won't have to change anything if I like the settings that I currently set. View tooltips. That means that if I'm scrolling around here, I can actually see these little pop-ups that come up just like that. Or over here, see another pop-up that pops up here. It gives me some information about what these buttons do. So I can read them right from there. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the tooltips. So now we've got the help. This takes you to the Antares website and allows you to view some of the topics for getting further help or more detailed help. You'll get tutorials and so on and so forth from there. If I've changed around this window here, so let's say I do that and I stretch it to whatever size I want it to be, I can go here and say, hey, reset the window size, and it goes right back to whatever the default size was that it comes out of the factory with. And then again, I can reset it to whatever I want. All right, so that's it, other than the version number that's at the very bottom there. The on-off button just basically bypasses, so that if I am playing something through, this will turn it off. So let's go ahead and start the playback, and you'll hear. All right, so as you can see, I haven't done anything yet to the vocals on this. They're pretty low in the mix. Turn that off. It's even worse. There's nothing else going through there. And in a minute, we're gonna start getting into some of those vocals and changing them around. So we've got the setup, whether we want single or dual mode. And right now that's in single mode. As I mentioned in the other video, this is really useful if you're trying to just get a transparent view of what the vocals are coming through are. You can actually set it to the modern mode, and it gives you a complete transparent, no kind of coloring or anything on the actual vocals. Because the other compressors are modeling after legendary compressors that exist in the marketplace, such as the LA2As and the CL1B and so forth, those are going to have a little bit of color because they're trying to mimic those specific compressors. But the modern is more of a digital compressor. There's no coloration or anything like that that's happening on the actual vocals. So that's why it gives you more of a transparent view, and that's why it's very useful in this single stage where you have nothing else adding to the color of the actual track itself. You're hearing it purely as it's going through the actual compressor. And it helps for pinpointing certain problems and issues that you might be having, just to get a true view of what the vocals sound like. Okay, so that's single, and then double, of course, allows me to have in series two of the compressors. And right now I actually have the second one still off, as you saw from that button. If it's dimmed out, it's off. If it's black, it's on. So what we want to do next is look at a couple of other things here. For one, you see that there is the input. Let's turn on the vocals, and you can see we can control, and I put it into loop mode so that this way we can actually just loop through it. All right, so input allows you to increase the input that's going into the actual compressor itself. Right now it's actually off, so you're not seeing anything moving in the needles, but I'm going to turn it on so you can see it. Okay, so now all of a sudden you heard that the vocals popped out like that, and I'm actually peaking there a bit because I've got it so high now. So I'm going to take this back a little and to avoid it peeking out on me. All right, so now that actually doesn't sound too bad. It's got a pretty good sound to it right now. All right, so let me give you a quick rundown. All right, so I'm gonna solo this vocal. And so we can get into some of the parameters. So the first thing I want to show you is, first of all, let's get rid of this peaking. It's still peeking out a little bit on me. Lower that a bit. The output peak. Oh, still going. So the first section we're going to look at is the assist side. Let's start from the very beginning. If we were looking at this track brand new, we haven't done anything with it yet. First thing I would do is I would go in here and I could attempt to figure out what type of vocals I have coming through here. Let's say I decided this was an alto tenor and I hit on the compressor select type, and I'm going to say I want it to be controlled somewhere in the middle, not too aggressive, but I also don't want it to be minimally. And now remember, this is going to basically using the AI as to what it should be based on the parameters that I'm selecting here when I tell it to go ahead and learn. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the style, and I'm going to say I want it to have like kind of a warm feel. I don't want it to be too gritty, but let's just go warm for now. And I'm going to say learn, and you can see the countdown is counting down from 5, and in a second it'll have it for us, and there's the results. So now what it's telling us is that it says it thinks that the first compressor should be a FET compressor, which basically the FET compressor, you may or may not know, but it's trying to model the 1176 style compressor. And the 1176 style compressor has a input gain, it has an output, and it has the attack knob, and it has a release, and it has a ratio. The attack is controlling the speed that the compressor kicks in, and the release is controlling the speed that the compressor lets go. Now, in this specific case, the numbers increase to create a faster speed. It's kind of like a gas pedal and a brake pedal. So if you push on that attack and make it fast, it's basically going to kick it in faster. If you push on that release, increase the number on it, it's going to kick out the release faster. So most of the time we probably want to have moderate numbers to start with, just to get a feel for what it should be. But in this particular case, since we're using the AI to begin with, before we start messing around with it, we're gonna look to see what it sounds like once we select this. Now on the second compressor, it's telling us that compressor 2 should be a Opto A is what it's estimating we should have there. Now the Opto A is styled after the LA2A style compressor. This compressor has essentially 2 knobs. The first knob is the peak reduction, and that's really where the magic happens. It controls the ratio, the attack, and the release and threshold all on one knob. And as you'll see in a second with this particular compressor, once I select it, you see that there is a peak knob, a peak reduction knob, and it's got that second one, which is the gain knob. The gain knob is controlling the gain output. So kind of like once we get everything compressed so that the low ends are brought up to a level where they're just about even with the high parts of the dynamics, the gain knob will allow us to increase the amount of volume that's being sent out after it's already done the compression, so that we can get back to normal range. So say for example we were at let's just use a reference of 0 dB, but by compressing it brought it down, let's say by 3 dB, so that we're no longer getting that higher end, so that the vocals aren't sitting right in that mix. As we start to increase the output knob, that gain button, it will start to level it out again so that it can start to sit again where we want it. But this time, now the low ends are about even with whatever high parts are in that vocal, which is exactly what we're looking for. We want evenness throughout the whole vocal. We don't want any parts where the vocal kind of disappears when it gets really soft, and we don't want it to be excruciatingly loud when it gets really loud. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply the settings. And so now you can see that it changed the sound of it. Now, if I wanted to, I can keep these exactly as they are, and I can go over to the volume of this, and as you can hear, the vocals got lower, but everything is really even now. So if I increase the volume, which is all I'm doing, is just bringing up the level for this using the fader, and now it's sitting there in the mix. Now let's go ahead and unsolo this. So now you can see it's blending in well. You can hear pretty much everything, all the low ends, all the high ends. It's done a pretty good job at figuring out where it needs to be. Now let's go ahead and mess around with some of the other knobs. So I soloed it again. Bring this down a bit. But before we do that, if you're finding some value in this video, it would absolutely help out the channel if you could click the like button. Your support is much appreciated and goes a long way towards helping and sharing this content with others. Let's say I started just on my own and I said, okay, I'm gonna bring in the various compressors on my own. Let's turn off this one and see what we could do with just this first one in here. So as you can see, this one controls how much volume is going in. This is pushing forward everything that's in that vocal right into the compressor. And I'll be able to control what the output is in a second. All right, so I'm going to increase the attack on it so you can hear the difference there. Let's give it a little bit more for the input. And now the release, remember, is how quickly it lets go of the compression once it's compressed it. So as I move towards the right, it's making it release it faster. As I move it to the left, you can hear it. It's not releasing as quickly. In fact, it almost sounds like it's ducking out as it compresses it, but it takes a long time to duck back in. I'm increasing it again. All right, let's bring in that second compressor now. So there's the gain. Remember, the gain is what's going to be pushed out after it's been compressed. And here's the peak. I'm compressing the heck out of it now. Now, if I wanted to, for example, bring that level up so that you hear it louder, I can push that output out. Now that's not too bad. I could actually probably live with that if I had to. Just push the volume up and get it more into the mix, but everything's pretty even now. Alright, so now let's switch out the Opto A for an Opto B. And then the Opto B, we're actually simulating a CL1B compressor. So now this is going to have the threshold, it's going to have ratio, attack, release, and gain. And then of course it has a warm button. And as you heard, as soon as I hit that warm button, things got a little bit more saturated. And it's exactly what these warm buttons do. They add saturation to your mix. Okay. So the threshold, in this one, we get to control all the parameters for the compressor. We can specify at what point it triggers. If I lower this threshold, then of course it's going to trigger the compressor faster, so you could hear that. See how the volume all of a sudden lowered down? Everything is pretty even, but it's a low volume because it's triggering it a lot faster. So that means softer sounds are going to hit it and it's going to trigger it quicker. Whereas if I raise this up, softer sounds aren't going to trigger it as much. Here's the attack on it. I'm going to increase the attack. Means it's going to kick in faster once it hits the threshold. Now, how much compression do I want on that? Most of the time on vocals, I probably want to have it on a low number. If this were like snare drums or cymbals or something that I was passing through it, I would probably want to increase this ratio. But as you can see with vocals, if I increase it, it makes it sound real crunchy. It's not what I want, so I want it to sound nice and crisp, so I'm going to lower that down to about 3:1 ratio. And the release, I'm going to increase it so you hear what that sounds like. Well, actually, on this compressor, going towards the right is slower, going towards the left is faster. So I'm going to decrease it if I'm going to the left. And then if I increase volume or gain, you hear the output coming out. It's already been compressed by the time I get here to this gain stage. Alright, so now let's go and play with the modern compressor. So again, this one has threshold. Works pretty much the same as the other one did in the sense that it will determine when it triggers the compressor. We have also the ratio, which as I mentioned before, is going to determine how much compression is actually happening. The attack, release, so all these things are there. The only difference that we see in this particular case is knee, which, as I mentioned in the last video, a soft knee would be a higher dB value, which results in more gradual transition than a hard knee, which is a lower dB value. So this controls how rapidly the audio is actually compressed after surpassing that threshold. You also have the side chains at the bottom here. So the side chains allow me to have an internal or an external side chain. For the internal, it's essentially utilizing the sound itself that's coming into the compressor. So say, for example, I had a set of drums that are driving through the compressor. I could have a filter on it, either low pass or high pass, to allow those things not to trigger the compressor. So if I said, for example, let's do high, and there are crashes and cymbals that are happening in the actual sound that's coming through, because they're at a higher frequency, it would allow the thing to pass through, everything to pass through without the compressor kicking in. Whereas if I set it to, let's say, a low, it could be that, I want to make sure that things like the kick drum doesn't cause it to trigger the compressor to turn on. The external would allow me to have another track trigger the compressor, so that as the other track is triggering a sound coming out, it triggers a compressor to compress whatever is passing through the compressor. So as an example, let's say I've got some piano that's playing on another track, but I'm compressing the vocals. I don't want them to compete with each other, so I could, for example, have the vocals compressed a bit while the piano is playing so that the piano sounds come through, and I can even set that on a particular frequency. Now, auto pitch, turning that on, has the ability of having it control the pitch of what's being compressed through. Now, notice that when I have the auto-tune pitch on, the filters turn off. If I turn it off, then I get the ability of being able to control, let's say, for example, internal, set high or high pass filter off, or low pass filter off or on. So I have the ability of turning on high pass filter or low pass filter for both internal and external. But if I want to have the auto-tune pitch filter on, then I can't control the filters anymore. That functionality is now being used for the auto pitch. And that's pretty much all the settings for the compressors, other than the mix, which this one is pretty obvious. You can either have it all dry going out without no compression, or wet going through the compression 100%, and anything in between. Now that you know all about the Auto-Tune Vocal Compressor and what it can do, start experimenting and making music with it. Try it out today and see what you can do for your vocals. The link to purchase it is in the description below. If you enjoyed this demonstration, make sure to let me know below in the comments. Also, help me by spreading the word and sharing this video with others. I've got a ton of upcoming special interest videos as well as other musical ideas. You won't want to miss those videos, so click the like button, share this with others, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss any future videos like this one. See you next time.